I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by SAE History of Ground Vehicles committee members, Jeff Singer, George Nichols, and Terry Mueller. On today's episode, we'll explore the history of ground vehicles, the SAE standards behind them, and how you can help tell that story and get involved. We hope you enjoy this episode. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I want to kick this off in a different, interesting way. And to you, gentlemen, and Jeff, we'll start with you. What makes cars so special?
Wow, yeah, that is a great question. I think as much as we're in this as engineers, and there's the nuts and bolts, of course, and the mechanics and everything. I think that there's the emotive factor that comes from cars. When you're really into cars and you enjoy cars, working on them, and working in the industry and kind of looking at the history of the industry, it really I think gets down to the emotions that cars evoke.
Terry, where do you think that emotion comes from?
It's a hard one to define. I think it's all about integration. It's everything from the design, the shape, the power, the package. It's one of those things where I always say if you look at a vehicle and you need more than 2 seconds to decide if you like it, you really don't, because it's a thing. It just hits you. You can tell.
That's a fascinating take. Terry, what's your take on what Jeff just said?
For myself, cars to me has soul to it. And I never forget my first car I bought. I never forget the industry I'm in. And for me, it's just I always call it rolling art. And when I see a car, especially a historical car, there's always a story behind it. And I would love to know that story. And for me, it's just, there's a visceral thing about driving an old car. And that's the sounds, the smells, and everything else. And that's why I'm so in love with the hobby and this committee. It's just been phenomenal.
George, Terry brings up a great point around the soul of a car. We've all experienced it. Each car is different, and some of us are the ones that give the cars names, and we give our cars names. What are your thoughts on what makes a car so special?
Well, I like the one word that Terry used was visceral. I mean, that's where I find it, kind of reflecting on my own interests. I can remember back to literally when I was 5 years old and just, sitting out on the front porch and watching cars go by. And how true it is, I don't know, but at least the memory is that family members and things like that were always amazed that I was so young and able to say, oh, that was a Ford so-and-so, or that was a GM so-and-so, or Chevrolet, and just being able to identify these cars at a small age. And it gets back to what Terry had used as the word, visceral, that I have thought about this myself over time, over the years, and really haven't come up, I guess, with a very satisfactory answer. It just seems so inherently natural that now that's not going to be true of everyone. People have different interests, but I think for those of us that like cars, that it is something just, again, very visceral.
George, there was a kids movie, and I don't remember the name of the movie, but this little boy was sitting in his room, and he was in the front of the house, and he said, "Oh, that's this car, that's that car," and he would remember the engine, and then sure enough, it was a movie. He was always right. Were you that kid in the movie that was, "Oh, this engine, this is a Hemi, or this is that"? Were you that kid?
I guess so, but maybe going off on a different tangent. And bottom line, I think this is purely coincidental. But it's just one of those things that's in the back of your mind thinking, oh, maybe there's something there. So my little own piece of, I guess you'll say, George's trivia is I was born 100 years to the day after Henry Ford. What kind of meaning that has, I don't know. I always found it just interesting. So, I'll leave it up to, listeners, viewers, anyone else, what they make of that. But I always thought that there was just something there.
Well, you could say it's a sign. I think it's cool, perhaps, that you were there in the vagabond days with Ford and oh gosh, sorry, blanking on his name. Oh, I screwed this up. Sorry. It's Edison. Perhaps you were there the vagabond days of Ford and Edison and Firestone when they were going around, and it inspired that. Terry, staying on that theme, obviously Henry Ford had the Model T. What was your favorite car that you've ever driven?
Oh, I bleed blue. I'm a Ford fanatic. I have Mustangs. For me, it was the first car I ever bought was a 1966 Ford Mustang, and I never forget it to this date. It was terrible brakes, terrible steering, the quality and everything, but it was just like, that was my favorite car to drive because first it was an adventure because we didn't have ABS brakes back then. It was four drum brakes. So stopping became a very religious experience at times. But it was just driving that Mustang and it started a bad hobby. And that's why I'm still working at my age because the way the price of car parts and stuff like that is just, I don't know, it's the people. It's really hard to describe. When I drove my first car, it's still my favorite. I have other cars, but my first car, I never forget it. Especially when you're 16 years old and you have a car like that, something else.
Later in life, did you reacquire a 1966 Ford Mustang for the collection?
I actually have one. So I bought one 3 years ago and it was my first car. I found it and I'm in the process of restoring it.
That's fantastic. Jeff, do you have a favorite car that you've ever driven?
Yeah, that's that's another tough question, but I think the one that rises to the top for me is 1984 Pontiac Trans Am, and I think it's just back to what we're talking about, the emotive factor that car had. Just is still a carbureted engine, just the induction sound, the feel, the look of it. Yeah, one of those cars that you wish you had never sold.
You had the emotional connection to it. Was this during high school that you were rolling around that thing in high school and the big man on campus?
No, it was a little bit later than that, but let's just say that was a car where I'm lucky I made it through with some of the driving.
We've all got stories, and we'll leave that to a bar conversation. George, what's your favorite car you've ever driven, sir?
Again, that's a tough one. I guess I'll go a little bit off tangent, and it's not a car I directly drove, but one of my uncles who actually was he had a brother. I can tell you a little side story about him, but my uncle had a 1968 American Motors AMX. And I always just loved that car. My father, who was not necessarily a car person, he loved that car. Now, of course, being back then, he would come up. We lived in Michigan. He lived in Ohio. He would come up to visit us. And I think many people know, many audience members here would know that AMX is a two-seater. So he would come up with my grandmother in the passenger seat and depending on the trip, one or two of my cousins in the back. In the storage area, which of course, people would frown on nowadays. But that was then. But that was just a gorgeous car. 396 V8, 4-speed manual, nice brown color, black stripes on the hood, roof, and trunk. So just a gorgeous car.
Did you ever take the chance of driving on a football Saturday with Ohio plates into Michigan? Did that ever occur?
No, not that I recall. It was just his. Now, granted, this was a man that at that time when he had the car, he was the single, and then fast forward to probably about the mid to later 70s, he came up to visit again. This time with his wife and a couple of my new cousins. Would probably been a mid 70s white Chevrolet Malibu wagon. So just kind of reflects how things can change in life and how needs and desires evolve. So, but again, to this day, and that was, afraid to say how many years ago that was, but to this day, still have memories of that car.
But it's a great contrast that we've all gone through. I remember trying to fit I think my daughter was 3 at the time, trying to get a car seat and a sports car. That didn't work out, so we had to get the bigger car. It's the changes that we all make in life. Terry, yourself, George, and Jeff are all part of this wonderful committee on the history of the ground vehicle systems for SAE. For the listeners who aren't familiar with it, besides loving cars, could you tell us a little bit about the committee, please?
I can look into that. So we actually, with the SAE History of Ground Vehicle Systems Committee, is to document vehicle systems and subsystems design chronology for the evolution of supporting SAE standards. So we are kind of like, the way I look at it is we're the gatekeepers of data information on historical vehicles. And that to us is stimulates why we're part of this committee. For example, I'm a welding engineer, and back then they actually had procedures to weld up truck springs for when they broke on the farm, and they actually had procedures for that and everything else. And we Jeff's, I do believe Jeff's into body structures, and George, and we are kind of a group of enthusiasts who actually have an engineering background, and we want to save this information. And the way we're saving this information is we're establishing through SAE a library. So we, people who want to extrapolate this information for their own personal use or to learn from the past, because sometimes you have to learn from the past to figure out the future. And that's the whole concept of this committee.
Jeff, what type of systems is Terry referencing? Is it the whole, different parts of the vehicle architecture, or what systems is it exactly?
Systems as a vehicle as a whole. So that means we used to have an expert who was electrical. Jeff was bodies. I'm welding, mechanical as well. George was working for Toyota in the body side. We're just a gather of engineering enthusiasts, and it goes from bumper to bumper. Best way for me to put it. So we want to go and get enthusiastic, be the gatekeepers of this information, because once it's gone, it's gone. And it's amazing. People forget how advanced we have been in the past 100 years. We used to, perfect example, if you look at a 1982 Monte Carlo with a 350, it puts out 140 horsepower. Now we have a 2020 Honda Civic SI that puts out 220 with 1.5 liters. We want to make sure that people remember that history and how the industry has grown.
Jeff, the history is really impactful, and you can, if you want to use the term, unpack and learn a lot from it. Do you get engagements from universities or high school shop classes that want to learn from this data, potentially put into their curriculum in schools?
I guess one of the things that we need to kind of talk about is we're really sort of relaunching this committee. So that's something that could be there in the future. I mean, as we look at, who the audience is here, we're looking at is, Terry's mentioned enthusiasts, collectors, certainly engineers who are working in the industry, just from a standpoint of understanding how a system evolved. But, as we mature, we could certainly see some kind of outreach there, because it's a motive and a vision to really look at sort of this intersection, because we can talk about how does vehicle systems evolve. As Terry mentioned, we're looking top to bottom. I mean, we look at vehicle attributes like safety, MVH, package, but we'll go to the component level, and that information can serve multiple needs. And I think the key thing here is, as Terry mentioned, we're tying back to what was the role of SAE when we look at a particular system. So it's standards that developed along the way. I mean, SAE was formed, very early in the early 1900s, 1912, I think. So what is that progression where SAE was involved in sort of shaping development of vehicle systems?
To do that, Jeff, are you tapping into the SAE archives? If you kind of, basically, if you want to use, I'm going to go back old school now to build an Encyclopedia Britannica almost of a highly accurate data?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, we're at the beginnings of this as we're, we have the vision set, we know where we want to go. That's absolutely going to be a resource for us. So, if you can envision, what sort of some of the output and product looks like here, we will walk through, the timeline of a vehicle system or an attribute, and, talk about and sort of articulate how did that system develop or that attribute develop. But then along that path, if you can imagine this sort of left to right on a paper, we'll also plug in, here's what SAE standards came in to influence, and here's where the technical papers came in, so that it really gives this sort of missing layer, because that's not really there in the enthusiast community or even the engineering community.
So would you say there's a void in the marketplace? I'm using that very broadly, that you're looking to fill, because if you look at history books, you can learn so much from history books, but a lot of the stuff that your committee is working on is not very well documented. When I say not very well, not very thoroughly, from all these little nooks and crannies that go into different types of vehicles, from a 66 Ford Mustang to a 84 Pan Am Trans Am. There's nuances in all of that stuff, and then sometimes some of the, unfortunately, finds the shredder and doesn't see the light of day again.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a bit nuanced, because there's certainly no shortage of, if you pick a vehicle, you can find so much about that vehicle through whether it's online or printed materials, sometimes information issued by the manufacturer. But the thing that will make us unique in this is that we're going into a deeper layer. We're going into this deeper layer where we're actually going to bring out this technical story, the technical story of, okay, so if I would take steering, I mean, in the early 1900s, it was a tiller system, right? You had this bar. So if you walk from there to now, we're talking about steer by wire. Well, how did that develop? I mean, there's obviously the geometric aspect of it, of, okay, physically these things changed, but with the SAE resources, the SAE library, and the broader technical community, because there's still a vast number of technical committees that own and work on these systems. We want to build this story that says, yeah, here's how the engineering development worked. Here's when here's when this first standards hit for things like, well, we're talking a lot about horsepower and engine performance. I mean, that's one of the kind of almost the marquee items of people that if you ask about SAE, they know about that, right? So it's those kind of things where we talk about when did things go to standards? Where were the influences that might have been from technical papers written? So it's this deeper layer. We're really kind of peeling back the onion even deeper than you're going to find on an online blog, right?
George, that's a good way to ask you this question. Do you view it as an interactive living archive? Where Jeff said, I love the line, it's more interactive than a blog. Do you view this as a living archive where somebody can go and learn about different types of powertrains or different types of historical elements inside of vehicle, or even seats? The seats have changed dramatically in cars. Do you view this as a living archive?
Yeah, absolutely. We're calling ourselves a historical committee, going through those histories, but in the future, as we start making our documents, documenting all these evolutions of these different systems, of course, those standards themselves will change, evolve over history, just like they did in the past. Now, that's going to be a much longer time frame, as Jeff, I think, alluded to, that in a sense, we're getting started now. But I guess I would point out one distinction is that when we were speaking earlier, I was referencing specific vehicle and AMX. Terry mentioned a Mustang, but what's important here, and I guess what we haven't called out specifically, though Jeff has been saying it over the past few minutes, that our histories will be about vehicle systems, not vehicles. And this was something that we had taken quite a bit of time to go through in developing what was going to be the result of our committee. What product will we develop? And there are numerous, either online blogs or car clubs that talk about whether it's Mustangs or Camaros or choose your vehicle. So that is, I think, well taken care of by people not in SAE. But if you look at what we are as a committee within the standards structure of SCE, we had to figure out, okay, well, how do we fit into where we're located within SAE? And since the standards committees work on vehicle systems, they don't work on Mustangs, they don't work on Camaros, they work on whether it's seats or safety components or engines or body structure, suspension, tires, whatever it might be, lighting. The list goes on and on. For us to fit in with where we are located within that standard structures, we came to the realization that it made sense for us to concentrate on the histories of those standards about vehicle systems. So I guess that's kind of bridging from where initially we talked about vehicles, our interest in vehicles, to actually what we are doing as a committee.
I think that's wonderful for the audience that's sitting here saying, okay, systems. Should the audience think of mechanical? Should they think of welding, the metal? What should the audience think of when you refer to vehicle systems, George?
I would say all the above. I think, and we're still, I guess I'll say, early in our stages of what we're going to be doing, but we do have a better target to what we're working on. But I think the first start is for us to look at, and this could change, of course, it's going to be a discussion within the committee, but I think a good starting point is looking at what systems there are standards committees for. And so it just would naturally fall in line with what those standards committees have generated over their histories.
I think the structure's there for us already, because there's the composition of SAE committees, and that's it can be a bit organic that way, because we don't have to make that up. We can leverage the committees, and in fact, we intend to reach out significantly to the SAE committees, because a lot of the people, the individuals that are working on the new standards, also they can reach back, and who's better to work on a history of a steering system than somebody that's been doing it for a long time. So that's one of our guiding principles of what we're doing here, is we're going to leverage the committee structure, both as for the subject matter or the structure of it, but also to tap that expertise.
To me, I'll say it very bluntly, I think the committees are an unparalleled resource that you have access to. They can allow you to do things. Terry, obviously, vehicle systems are changing, and they're going to continue to change. Obviously, the committee is focused on historical elements, but in 2 years, or let's be honest, in 6 months, some of these vehicle systems could be outdated the way that we're going. Will you and the committee continue to look at these newer technologies and as they become more of historical, incorporate them into what you're building with this living archive?
We do have a mandate that we like to look at vehicles, say 25 years past production. So we're not going to look at new systems, but we want to kind of be, with the historical portion of it. And, and that's like, say, 1984 and previously. There's cars that have significant influence within the automotive industry. We will look at that. We will consider it as historical and stuff like that. And we want to save that information. It's an interesting fact that BMW 5 years ago used methanol injection, and that technology was used in 1963 in Oldsmobile. So they looked at the past, they saw performance gains, and that's why they implemented it in the future. So
vehicle systems are cool. I saw a Z1 a couple weeks ago when the doors just came up, and I thought, wow, this is the coolest thing. I didn't know that was possible. What some of the, in this committee, to you gentlemen, what are some of the neatest, coolest vehicle systems that you've uncovered that blew your mind? You're like, aha, I didn't know that was there. And it was just one of these aha, fun, happy moments when you uncovered something.
One of the neatest vehicle systems I have, it was like how early supercharging was actually done. This is 1930s technology. Now everybody says, oh yeah, my vehicle's supercharged and I get all this. that's old technology, but everybody goes, they think it's brand new. And for me, I'm just shocked. Like I stated previously before, when you get a 1.5 liter it's turbocharged, making the same, more horsepower than a 350 or 5.7 liter, it's phenomenal. I get a kick out of it. But yeah, turbocharging, it's a game changer, but that's been used many, many years ago.
And that's the beauty of what your committee is building. George, well, how would you describe the committee in terms of who makes up the committee? Is it individuals actually work in the automobile industry? Is it individuals that have retired that have worked there? Is it enthusiasts? How would you describe the committee to a listener?
In terms of the personnel composition, we actually don't have that many right now. That's pretty much due to our revisiting, what we were actually going to do. But I think the three of us we have online here, we are heavily involved with the auto industry, and yet a fourth member actually has, if I remember right, he has interest in the auto industry also, or participation, but then also from the aerospace side, which I find interesting because that's partly my background. So before I was in the auto industry, I was in the aerospace industry. And just over time, I've noticed, excuse me, that's actually not very unusual. There was another company in the auto industry I was working for prior to my Toyota position, and I encountered a number of people that had some type of aerospace background. So I find that kind of overlap, to use double negative, not uncommon. But interestingly enough, Grayson, that tomorrow we'll have one of our committee meetings. And because of information that was published in a SAE publication, basically the SAE Update magazine, we have interest in about 4 or 5 or 6 more people. So maybe tomorrow, so this is speculation on my part, we actually might technically like double our membership. I'm jumping the gun basically, but I think we look forward to really anybody that is interested in this topic to participate.
Okay, Jeff, I'm going to jump the gun and follow George's lead. If there's a listener who's listening to this and they say, okay, vehicle systems, yeah, I'm interested. How do they get involved?
Well, I mean, step one, I think, is as George just mentioned, is join one of our regular meetings. We have, I think it's every 6-week cadence. So that's step one. But then also, reaching out to any of us directly. Mark Czar is our lead from SAE. Mark's been a huge help in getting this organized, and so that's another contact for people. So yeah, I would say join a meeting, but if you have questions about what the vision is and what we're trying to do, reach out to us directly.
I've said this before in many SAE podcasts. Roll your sleeves up and get involved. You might learn something. And then vehicle systems, there's a lot to unpack with vehicle systems. And gentlemen, this has been a fascinating conversation. As we look to wrap this up, what would you like our listener to take away with them? And Terry, we'll start with you, sir, please.
The one thing I want to take away from this whole thing is I have learned something new every meeting. And from expertise that's on the board to even our trivia questions, it's just every time I learn about something. And that is just, it makes me want to come to the committee meetings. It just stimulates that. So, and we have a great bunch of people in the committee as well. So please come on out.
As Terry says, please come out. George, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
I think kind of following up from Terry, that I think one way to perceive this particular committee is that it's fun. Not to denigrate all the technical committees in SAE, which I participated in a number of them, but to some degree, it might be more perceived as being work. There's a specific need for work on a standards document to be done. There can be various pressures from various sides. This one, it's unique in that sense. Even though, again, technically we're within the SAE technical committee structure, the content we'll be working on is far different than a typical standards committee. So part of that, I think, again, goes back to this being really a fun, enthusiastic group that really comes from various backgrounds. And to some degree, we will decide what we want to work on. So if somebody is really strongly interested in a certain system, then it's like, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and start working on that.
Jeff, it's pretty obvious from this conversation that it's a lot of fun. What would you like our listeners to take away with them?
What I would say is if you're looking for that next level of information around technical evolution of vehicles and systems in those vehicles, this is your committee. And it's I think it's a committee that will sort of satisfy an array of interests. I mean, whether you're already working in the system area and it's just being able to peel back again deeper into, well, how did we get to where we are today in terms of design and standards? Or if you're an enthusiast and you just want to have more knowledge about how a particular vehicle or a type of vehicle became what it is, this is the place.
I'll summarize it this way, gentlemen. Get involved, have fun. Today is tomorrow, tomorrow is today. The future is vehicle systems. Jeff, George, Terry, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you, Grayson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as we explore how cities in the EV sector must adapt as federal support fades, shifting towards locally driven, financially sustainable solutions.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.